My name is Colin Mayer from Voices from Oxford. I'm with Daniel Tudor, who's the Korean correspondent for The Economist. He's an alumnus of Oxford University, having done PPE at Somerville College, and he's an author of a recently published book called Korea, the Impossible Country. And I will, if I may, start, Daniel, by asking you whether or not you think that Korea is still an impossible country.
Well, I think so, yes. I mean, there are two books out these days. One from me, Korea, the Impossible Country, and there's one about North Korea, the Impossible State. So there's something of a battle going on, which is more impossible right now. I have to concede that North Korea is rather impossible indeed. In the case of South Korea, I think there are two reasons why I call it impossible. The first is if you were to go back 50 or even 40 years to imagine that South Korea could become a wealthy democracy with a lot of cultural achievements these days as well. It would be impossible to imagine that. And one of my interviewees who was working in the government back in the 1960s, he said, we were the poorest, most impossible country on the planet. Mm-hmm. And so Korea still has, and part of the Korean narrative, the modern narrative of Korea, I think, is this idea of this miracle. And there are a lot of people who argue with it as well, but I think there's a very real achievement that Korea has made. The other sort of side of the impossible coin is, I think, all of this striving and achievement and need to succeed has led to this culture of very intense competition. And I think that especially for young people today, the economy is not growing as fast as it used to. Opportunities don't seem as easy to come by as before, but there is still this drive. You have to be a successful person, and it's very, very difficult, I think. It's very hard for young people to get the kind of jobs that they are told they must want, and it's very hard to get into the right university and all this kind of. So I think for a young person, although life is materially much more comfortable than it was for their parents, I think there's a psychological feeling of my life is impossible. So that's why I feel it's an impossible country.
And is it the case that you think that there has been a considerable influence from religion on the nature of Korean society? Because you talk in very interesting terms about the different religions that are important in Korea. Do you think that those are still an important factor?
I think so, very much. Even something like shamanism, I mean, this is 40,000 years old. It comes from Siberia. It's the most ancient aspect of Korean culture, I would guess. And it's really still with us, and it guides how, let's say, if somebody wants to open a new business or has a big decision to make, a lot of people will actually go to these shaman, the mudang they're called, and consult with them. So it's like a kind of ancient and modern kind of psychiatrist or life coach, if you like. Also, I think shamanism has given this sense of openness in religion. Korea is very syncretic with regard to religion. So when Buddhism arrived here about 1700 years ago, it blended with shamanism rather than, they didn't have a hostile relationship as an incoming religion might be expected to have. And they blended. Now Buddhism, if I can move on to Buddhism, I think Buddhism, its peak in influence was around 1,000 years ago. But still maybe 20 or 25% of the population are Buddhists. And they, again, when people have a big moment, a lot of stress in their life or a big decision to make, they will go to the temple and pray for some kind of the outcome that they want. Also, I think Buddhism, if you look at the way companies are managed, I mean, there's an academic who I interviewed, Professor Kim Ui-chol, he's called. He told me, and I strongly believe this myself, having seen it. Korean firms like Samsung and also Japanese firms like Toyota, they have this culture of continuous improvement, and he says it comes from Buddhism. There's this concept called the Sangha, the group of religious believers who kind of group together to help each other and to continuously work on their faith collectively. And I think that can be said to guide how certainly very large Korean firms like Samsung Electronics, for example, how they are run. They're not inventing a new category of device, but they're refining existing ones and perfecting them. And I think that's quite a Buddhist concept. Christianity, though, Christianity is now the most common religion in Korea. It's a relative newcomer. It's only been here a few hundred years. But it has actually great political influence as well. There are very influential churches. There's one called Somang, which is in the Gangnam area of Seoul. Everyone knows Gangnam now, of course. This church has around 700,000 members, spread out through various affiliate churches. And during the last presidency, the previous president, he was a member of this church. A lot of the people around him were members of this church. And it became a very influential organization. So in Christianity, perhaps not Christianity itself, but Christianity as a group, Christian churches have certain influence in Korea.
What do you think needs to be done in terms of addressing the problems of the Chaebols, which have featured very prominently in the recent presidential elections?
I think from the 1960s onwards, Chaebol have had enormous impact on Korea and have made a positive contribution to the development of Korea. But I think we and Chaebol heads especially have to remember that they were given a privileged position by Korean society. The president at the time, Park Chung-hee, selected certain individuals, to the boss of Hyundai or the boss of Samsung. We will give you this contract to build this bridge or build this road or these hospitals. You have to do what we say, but you will be rewarded. And so that was how Korea really developed in those early days. And I think sometimes the bosses of these companies, they perhaps forget that and don't take their responsibility to Korea, I think, seriously enough. And so we see a lot of, because these companies do have ginormous market power, any market worth having in Korea is an oligopoly, and it will be controlled by Samsung and Hyundai or LG and Lotte or something of that nature. And so that leads to price fixing, it leads to all kinds of market manipulation. And the thing is, there are laws that exist to stop this, but the Fair Trade Commission, for example, is really toothless. And even if a Chaebol chairman is convicted of something, he will usually receive a pardon from the president. And so we'll have to wait and see. There are a couple of them in jail right now, so we'll see what happens around the next Liberation Day, if they are let out or not. So I think that the existing rules are there, but they're just not really applied.
Would you characterize Korea as being a trust-based society, or is it one where trust has now really broken down a great deal?
I think Korea's very high trust within groups of people who already know each other. So Korean society loves hometown connections or past military connections. Every man has to go to the army. Loves academic connections, and of course friends and family. Within that, people trust each other to a very strong extent. And even as a foreigner, having lived in Korea a while, people who I get close to, I think we can do anything for each other. It's really wonderful. But on a broader level, some person you've never met, you might not, you perhaps wouldn't do anything to help them. And I think if we look at politics, for example, I think people have low expectations of politicians. People really hate politicians in this country, and I think part of the reason for that is they just expect politicians to behave selfishly, to be corrupt, and to help their old friends. And I think that also it creates a vicious circle in itself, because politicians then feel, well, why should I? So I think that there is great trust, but just within people who, within a specific group.
one of the areas that you're most critical about Korea is in terms of the level of competition in society. Is that something that you think is improving, or is it in fact getting worse?
I think it's broadened out. I mean, I think that in the early days of South Korea, Korea was very equal in those days. If you look at any sort of Gini coefficient data, this kind of stuff, very, very equal. And the way to get ahead was through education. So you'd get, the smartest kid in the village would gain entrance to Seoul National University, where we are now, and they would throw a street party for him, that kind of thing. And so in that sense, competition was very positive. So the person who works hardest and the person who is brightest will come out on top. But over time, I think competition has really broadened out. And so now, one of my interviewees was the CEO of a company called Duo, which is I believe, the largest matchmaking agency in Korea. And she told me that in the past, men just wanted pretty girls, and women, they just wanted a guy with money, basically. But now they both want everything. Yeah. The man wants not just a beautiful woman, but one who is well educated, one who a superwoman, and a woman would like a man who is not just well educated and smart, interesting, has a good job, good money, is also tall and handsome. Everything you could possibly wish for rolled into one. And so I think these days it's not just about getting ahead, it's also about looking the best, being the most well-dressed. And as a foreigner here, I feel somewhat liberated because I'm not really part of that. But I do feel sorry for a lot of my friends who feel forced into being beautiful or handsome and perfect, as well as witty and successful.
If we could turn to North Korea, what do you think South Korea should be doing in response to the current threats that are coming from North Korea? Do you think it should be seeking to build up closer relations, or does it, as some people have said, have to respond in kind by building up its own nuclear force?
My own view is very fatalistic, actually. I don't think there's very much that South Korea can do. I think that North Korea at this stage is absolutely determined to have nuclear weapons. They are the insurance policy. And I think, having seen what happened to people like Gaddafi, Kim Jong-un has to be thinking, well, I need these. Also, domestically too, I think it helps shore up the regime, showing we are a strong country. This kind of approach, and so I think South Korea really can't stop North Korea from having nuclear weapons, and can't stop them from being belligerent. I think, by and large, I'm more in favor of engagement than not. But at this point, the way North Korea is behaving, you can't. Clearly it's unacceptable, and you can't encourage them further, I would say. So South Korea really has to, I think, work with, try to bring US and China together more, if that's possible. We've seen China supporting the UN sanctions recently, which is, I think, a good start. But historically, China has always been on the side of North Korea. So I think it has to be, perhaps we have to change the perception a little bit. China sees the North Korea situation as part of, this is US in Asia, on our doorstep, containment strategy. And I think the US and South Korea have to perhaps show China or convince China that that's not the case. But I don't know if that's possible at all.
And finally, could I just ask you whether you would encourage Korean students to come to study in Oxford, and how you think that they might benefit from doing that?
Absolutely, I would. I mean, I'm a graduate myself, and it was probably some of the best years of my life were spent in Oxford. I think that Oxford has obviously a unique system of education, the tutorial system, where you'll be one-on-one or perhaps two-on-one with the leading experts in the subject you're studying. It's a really special experience, and I don't think you can get that anywhere else, really. So it's something I look back on very, very fondly. I have a number of Korean friends who have been to Oxford or are there now, including the president of the Oxford Union who just left, Lee Seung-yoon or John Lee. He's a friend of mine, and he seems very happy there. And I believe there's a growing Korean society there as well. So I don't think anyone needs to feel too lonely away from home. And it's a wonderful city as well to live in. So of course I would. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.